Welcome to Universal Man. My name is Mark Weppett, and I'm here to help you stop screwing around and play a bigger game with your life. And today I'm going to be bringing you the second episode of the Man of Action series, where it's all about how to get yourself addicted to success and fulfillment. And, also get yourself unaddicted to all the crap that's wasting your time and energy. And so I'm really excited for this episode because I got a great response to the first entry in the series where I introduced this topic of a dopamine detox, this process of learning how to make yourself almost bored on purpose to free up dopamine in your brain so that you can then plug it into things that are more valuable and useful to you. And so, I recommend going back and checking that out. But in this video, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about how to actually set up your dopamine detox, because if you do it wrong, chances are you're just not going to do it. You're not going to follow through with it. We got to make sure we're not taking on too much and we're not taking on too little. And so there's a bit of a science to that I've picked up through my years of coaching and that sort of thing and personal experimentation that I really want to share with all of you guys. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Most guys fail to build good habits because they're stuck in bad thought patterns. Until you recondition your brain to think new thoughts in the moments that matter, you'll keep ending up in the same old places over and over again. This is why I created the Metta method. It's a free guide that will teach you 3 simple yet insanely powerful journaling techniques that, when practiced regularly, will reprogram your brain for near automatic success. I've read hundreds of client journals in my years as a professional coach, and I've identified exactly what you need to put down on the page if you want to create positive life changes that truly stick. And no, just endlessly writing about your feelings doesn't work. So if you want to learn my secret weapons of self-development, then click the link below and grab your free copy of the Metta method now. So first off, I want to thank you guys for your support in the last video, especially some of the guys who were talking about their experiences where it's like, oh yeah, I'm totally just wasting too much time. I don't have the motivation for other stuff. And then there's also some guys who are talking about how when they were deployed overseas or, they traveled to a different country where they didn't have access to all of the modern entertainment and that sort of thing, they became like super productive. They got in like awesome shape. They were filled with all this fire and passion and all this kind of thing. And anyone who's had an experience like that, go ahead and post it in here, because this is an idea I really want to catch on, because I think it's simple. It's so simple. It's like cut out the dumb stuff, put in the good stuff. And it makes your life so much better. Like, people were wondering, I'm wondering if, your motivation here is going to keep going. Well, I'm weeks into my detox where I was cutting out extra stuff, and I feel like my interest and passion for the more important things in my life is just continuing to climb. So, I'll keep you guys updated, but as of now, this is, I think, a really, really big deal. And so let's start breaking down the core topics here today. So what we want to be doing is talking about how to balance the removal and the additions in the dopamine detox. So it's like we're going to cut out some bad stuff, add some good stuff. And in order to understand this, we got to understand the idea of neural loops. All right. Your brain, it's constantly releasing chemicals, and it's these chemicals that keep us plugged in and acting on the different plot lines in our lives. We've all got all kinds of different plot lines. We've got our relationships, we've got our work, we've got our recreation, we've got our habits, we've got, our escapes, we've got all these things, and all of these things are run by the machinery of releases of different neurochemicals in our brain, okay? And not all of these loops are created equal, and the ones that are most problematic are the ones that I would call escape loops. And if you followed my material for a while, you might be familiar with this idea. I've talked about like escape behaviors, but we're going to get a little more specific here. So an escape loop is something where you start in a negative state. It could be boredom, anxiety, frustration, loneliness, horniness, whatever. Usually there's some kind of cortisol sort of state, some kind of stress. And cortisol is the brain's stress chemical, and it's like we don't like that feeling, okay? And an escape loop is when you don't address the core cause of the cortisol, of the stress, and then you just go to something else that makes you feel better. basically you're running away from the issue. So if you're lonely, and instead of dealing with the loneliness, you just watch porn, for example, or play, more Elder Scrolls, whatever it is that you do, if you just keep doing that, that's not actually solving the loneliness, right? So it's skipping out of that plot and entering into a fantasy world that has nothing to do with your real life. And these kinds of things are very destructive when they are relied upon heavily. Basically, escape loops offer the sensation of a virtual reward. They give you some kind of feeling that something good is happening, when in reality there really isn't much good happening. Like, it's kind of like a pleasure first, pain later sort of thing. Because if you keep not addressing the core issues, well, then you're gonna, not be making any kind of progress in your life, right? And usually this is a sort of situation that kind of compounds, because the more dopamine and neurochemicals that are lined up with these escapes that actually don't improve your life, the less is going to be available for the things that do improve your life. And this is why most men today that I know, they're really hooked into their escapes, like whether it's sports, video games, porn, social media, politics, whatever. They're all super hyped on that. They can't wait to talk to you about that. But their goals, like their career, their health, their relationships, these kinds of things, they're usually like, it's like, yeah, I want stuff to be better there, but it's so hard. And it's hard because you don't have any dopamine hooked into that stuff, right? You don't have any anticipation. You don't have any desire. You don't care that much because, you're too occupied by these stimulating diversions. One of the things I got to clear up front here is that something that might be an escape for me may not be an escape for you. It really depends on how much your real goals demand of you. So, for example, if you're in a state in life where you don't have super consuming demands, well, then maybe you following a sports team really far and playing some video games and things like that, maybe that actually works well for you, okay? I think for the younger a guy is, the more that's the case. And maybe in some cases, the older, past retirement, that is arguably the more that could be the case. But like, if you have something that you really want to be hooked into, like say you're building a business, or say you're trying to reach the peak of a profession or something like that, the higher you're trying to aim, the more dopamine, the more neurochemicals that you need to be conserved and channeled directly toward that goal. And so at that point, those lesser things, while maybe they're, not objectively bad, like something like I would argue porn is, they're bad enough that you need to cut them out, because otherwise, if you hold on to them, it's just taking too much energy away from the stuff that really matters to you. But anyway, I think you get the idea here, is that these escape loops, these are the things that we want to be cutting out. And we need to be replacing them. You can't just create a vacuum. And what we want to be replacing them with is what I would call a discipline loop. And instead of following, the pattern of, I'm uncomfortable and then I'm just going to escape this and, run away to some pleasure and then ultimately feel worse, that's the escape loop. The discipline loop is, I'm going to voluntarily take on some discomfort, and then that discomfort is then going to release some reward. It's kind of like you pay up front and then you get, the payoff, right? And this is what we need more of. We need to have more of these discipline loops, because it's the discipline loops that, when practiced regularly, these are the things that lead to the most fulfillment. And as you practice certain discipline loops, you actually, like the amount of discomfort involved in them actually starts decreasing. It starts becoming easier and easier, to the point where your disciplines might even be something that you look forward to if you're doing this kind of detoxification properly. So what does this mean to be doing this properly? Well, here's the way that I'm currently viewing as the best way to set up your dopamine detox. Basically, you have what I would call a detox block, okay? Like a 90-day chunk, a quarter year. And in that quarter year, your goal is to drop the most damaging escape loop and institute some solid discipline loops, okay? And you don't want to go too hard. You don't want to be too extreme. Like, for example, a porn reboot, that would be more than enough to occupy one detox block, okay? And what this has to get you thinking in is in phases. in chunks. You can't do it all at once. You can do it all, just you can't do it all at once, okay? Because you can only apply so much pressure to yourself to voluntarily change your neurological configuration. Now, if there are some external things pushing on you, like, so for example, the people who, if you were deployed in the military or you were put in jail or, you had some kind of crazy scenario that forced you to behave in a different way or whatever, you can adapt a lot more change. This is why people who are, recovering like drug addicts or alcohol addicts, they can go away to rehab. And the rehab then acts as like an extra constraint to help them reconfigure their lives. But in terms of voluntary change, you're limited. You can only do piece by piece. And so what you have to start thinking on is in terms of transformation over larger periods of time rather than just instantaneous, switches. Because we live in a culture that is constantly selling a quick fix, a magic pill, this, that, or the other that will automatically make everything better. And in some cases, that's possible with modern technology, and that's fantastic. But this isn't the case for neural change, especially voluntary neural change. And so if you start thinking in terms of months and years, you can make radically significant progress. So you think about, one big change per quarter, you could be a dramatically different person by the end of a year. And then at the end of 3 years, you could be an entirely different person, 180 degrees, on the other side of, life in a lot of ways. And I've seen it happen. I've seen people go from basement-dwelling, neck-beard nerds who are just obsessed with video games and porn to being flourishing in their life, great, fit, have a girlfriend, thriving in a business, all that kind of stuff. Like, it can happen. It's just you got to plot things out properly. So basically, there's two sort of issues here that we just got to be aware of. The one is, like I was saying, doing too much. We've all tried to do that. We've all said, I'm going to add all these things and change all this stuff. And then, 2 days later, you crash and burn. You're back into the exact same stuff. Okay. We can't do that. And we also can't do too little. Okay. This is the other piece. Sometimes I see people trying to go too gradual with the change. And the issue with going too gradual is that there's not enough there to actually hook your brain in. There's not enough excitement. There needs to be a tangible enough change presented that your brain can at least get a little excited about it, that at least can think that, oh, wow, if I could do this, that would really matter to me. That would really be beneficial. And so you got to make sure that it's big enough to excite you a little bit. Usually, if it's exciting and a little bit scary, that's kind of where you want to be. Okay, you don't want to be super scary, at least not until you are much further along and you're feeling very confident in your self-control and whatnot. So exciting and a little scary. That's usually around the line that you're doing the right thing. But the other big piece that we got to make sure that we're clear on here is creating a balanced neurological exchange. And the way that I see it is that there are two different vectors for evaluating the things you're trying to remove and the things you're trying to add. And it has to do with that loop idea we were talking about earlier. It's like you've got the length of the loop, meaning how long does it take for the neurochemical drama to play out? And then the height of the loop, meaning how intense do the neurochemicals get? Okay? And so what we've got to do first is identify the most damaging escape loops and then replace them with the most beneficial, discipline loops. Okay. And so, for example, the most damaging escape loops are usually the ones that are the shortest length and the highest in intensity. And this would be things like hardcore drugs and like porn addiction. Those are the shortest and the highest. Okay. And so those are the things that you're going to want to cut first. All right. And if you have like a hardcore drug addiction, I'm not talking about pot so much. I mean, pot is an issue for a lot of guys. But if you're an alcoholic or you are, like a cocaine or a meth addict or something like that, those kinds of things, cut out first, get the help you need, make that happen. That's a major thing. That's kind of beyond the scope of this. But for most guys, their most intense, their shortest and spikiest sort of escape is porn. So you cut that out. Okay. Now, if you're removing a short and intense spike, what you got to do then is you have to replace it with something of a similar shape. Now, the challenge with this is that there's no one single natural healthy discipline that's going to reach that same level of intensity. So normally what ends up happening is if you got something that's short and super spiky, you got to do a one-to-many replacement. And this is what I talk about a lot in my quitting porn material. So you take something out that's short and spiky like porn, you have to actually add a suite of relatively short and spiky disciplines. So like disciplines in general, they tend to be less spiky, meaning they're less intensely pleasurable, but that pleasure tends to last a fair bit longer. And so usually for like disciplines, the ones that have that kind of more short and spiky, but less short and spiky than an escape, is really your basic routines, your basic self-care things like basic nutrition, sleeping well, getting up and like planning your day and doing the basic stuff, your basic responsibilities. All of these things, they're not super hard, but they make you immediately feel better. Everybody feels better when they get up, they eat a good breakfast, maybe they work out a little bit, something, real easy, and they plan their day, and then, they do that kind of stuff. The basic self-care things, and then they stick to a routine, they stick to a schedule, and this alone can do 10 times more for your mental health than, a pile of antidepressants. And it's been shown these kinds of things have a major impact. And these are usually the kinds of things that if you're taking out something short and spiky like porn that's real intense, you got to add some of these sort of things to compensate. And so kind of the first rung of this detoxification process is one where you're building up your baseline habits, rituals, and that sort of stuff that make you feel good. So after you take out the big things like porn and drugs and that sort of stuff, then maybe you're going to start working on cleaning up some of those other less intense but still short dopamine loops. Okay, these would be the things like pointless internet surfing, like social media compulsion, and then maybe video games could go in here. Video games might be more of a medium thing, but another thing maybe even like compulsive junk food eating, basically the stuff that's, it's over in a few minutes, right? This is the kind of stuff that can really occupy your mind. And as you start clearing that out, well, then you can start bringing in, some maybe a little bit more of the discipline, maybe a little bit more of the routine. Okay. And that's kind of like, maybe tier, the next layer, or you can even circle back to these. But eventually you're going to start getting into the medium length sort of activities. And these are the things that instead of happening over minutes or hours, they kind of happen more over days. And these are maybe less intense, but these are things that will occupy you for significant periods of time. So I'm talking about like TV series. Like if you just continuously like binge multiple TV series, those things keep you occupied for days, right? They suck dopamine out of your brain for days, okay? Because they hook you into a story and you want to see how that story ends. And, maybe there's a place for this in your life, but, like I was saying earlier, the more productive you're trying to be, the less of a place that there should be. Other things that could be like this are longer narratives would be like news stories. There's always some kind of hot new thing in the news that takes up the news cycle for the next couple of weeks. Longer video games, like say you've got a single player game with a long campaign that can occupy you for days, right? And so this is where you can start the kind of things that you would want to replace this sort of stuff with would be medium disciplines. So things like a good book, like a book that maybe moves you forward in some way of your life. Maybe it has to do with some topic you're interested in or something you want to learn about or whatever. Maybe a project. Like for me, one of these videos that I create here, these are multiple day affairs. They take a while. Sometimes they'll even take a week or two to figure out what I want to say in them, how I want to approach them, that sort of thing. And so that's when, so you take out a medium length escape, you add a medium length discipline, right? Makes sense? And then eventually you're going to start getting into the long loops. And the long loops are where the big stuff, I think, happens. Okay? These are the things that occupy you for, months or even years. Okay? So long escapes are kind of, they're usually things that have multiple short spikes, but then big kind of long-term payoffs and attractions and that sort of thing. Usually these are associated with some kind of junk status. So for me, my long-term escapes were for years competitive video gaming. I had the short spike of playing a match and maybe, doing good or whatever, but it had the long-term raising of neurochemicals and whatnot due to raising my rank and that sort of thing. And ultimately, it was a lot of energy, a lot of effort, a lot of mental space, a lot of neurochemicals invested in moving myself and progressing myself in something that you could almost consider like a shadow career. And I think I stole this concept from Stephen Pressfield, the guy who wrote The War of Art and Going Pro. Fantastic books for anyone out there who wants to try and build a business or something like that, or really move themselves forward in their work. He has this idea of shadow careers. These are the things that we invest in, we take super seriously, but don't actually move us forward in the ways that matter. And so for me, competitive video gaming was one of those things. For other people, it might be someone else's sort of career. Like maybe they're they're a sports addict. They're following the season of their hometown sports team. And there's nothing wrong with keeping up with it a little bit, but like if you watch every single episode, every single game of your, a hockey team or a baseball team or a basketball team, like that's a lot. That's a lot of time, right? Even an American football season, that's a lot of time, especially when you've got all the drama that happens between the games. If you keep up with all that sort of stuff, it really occupies you. And, maybe there's that chance of the big payoff. Maybe your team's going to win the championship, and then maybe it's going to be super exciting and a big, dopamine release and all that kind of stuff. But, is it really moving your life forward? Is it? And other things like this would be celebrity voyeurism. There's a lot of people out there, vloggers and whatnot, who just put their life on display, and people live vicariously through them, and they go through their ups and downs, that sort of thing. And then politics. People are obsessed with politics these days, and they're just, that's what they care about. Even though a lot of the stuff that's being discussed, while it may be important on some level, they're just far too invested in it, and it has no impact on their actual day-to-day life. And so when you take these sorts of things out, that's when you really start to thrive in the long-term disciplines. And it's these long-term disciplines that I believe they might take the most work, but they offer the highest highs. And I'm talking about the things like building a business, building really strong friendships that are actively maintained, having a strong, romantic relationship with a spouse. Maybe you bring kids into the world. And if you can do the work to make that a good sort of situation, then it's honestly the best thing ever. Like I've got a little daughter now who's 6 months old, and I'm obsessed with her. I've never been happier than when she smiles at me. It's the highest high. And the thing is, like, it takes a lot of work to get to that point, especially to have everything around that be good, right? And it's these long arcs that are most fulfilling. And so you got to figure out, what are these long arcs that you want to be working up toward? Maybe it's, you're getting a certain grade or passing a certain test or certification, or maybe it's a full body transformation, like going from someone who's, skinny fat to being, ripped and shredded. Maybe, you're some sort of artist or creative. These sorts of things, they take a long period of time. And what you got to understand is that you can't just take out a short and spiky escape and then replace it with a long-term discipline. It's like, especially if you've been relying on that short and spiky escape like porn, you can't just quit porn and build a business, all right? Because it's like you're taking out all of this excitement and then you're adding a huge uphill climb that won't probably be exciting for quite a while. Or if it's exciting in the beginning, it'll very quickly become very challenging. And so what you have to do is you kind of usually have to level yourself up in terms of this. And it doesn't mean that you can't take any action on this kind of thing, but it's just really trying to focus in on removing the worst thing. So the shortest and the spikiest, that's usually the worst. And then add, a short and compelling and rewarding discipline, and maybe even a few of them at once. And so you then gradually, once you clear out all the short and worthless kind of stuff, then you start moving into the medium chain stuff, and then you start really plugging yourself into the long-term stuff. And it's this kind of progression that I think offers the most realistic chance for personal transformation. And, let me know what you think of this below. Let me know, how do you want to map out your life transformation? How do you want to map out your detox blocks? Okay. And, this is something that I'm still working on. And maybe I'll tweak things as I move forward. But for now, from what I can tell, I've been doing work around this, especially around helping guys quit porn for years and years now. And so it's the same mechanics. And especially after you quit porn and you get out of the really intense stuff, it's actually just gets easier and more exciting because it's much more fluid. It's much, you can trust yourself. You have more self-control, more discipline, and that sort of thing. So it's like, you can just keep going and going. I don't see, there's no reason why every single person can't pursue genuine mastery in some area if they're willing to just carve off, the stuff that's wasting their brain space and direct it toward the stuff that isn't, the stuff that's valuable. So that's what I have for you guys today. Hopefully you found this interesting. So hopefully you found this useful. Please let me know what you think in the comments below. Play big. I'll see you in the next one.